You know, people always ask me the same kind of question. Don, who were the greatest athletes you ever saw? And it sounds simple. It really does. But the older I get, the more I realize it was never that simple. Because when people say greatest, they usually mean the fastest, the strongest, the ones who won the most medals. And I've seen a lot of those men. I've stood next to them. I've chased them down a straight. I've watched them disappear in front of me. But that's not what stayed with me. What stayed with me was something else. It was the feeling right before the gun, that quiet moment when the stadium goes still and you're standing there knowing everything you've done has led to these few seconds. And then you look to your left or your right and you realize the man next to you isn't just fast. He's something different. Over the years, there were a few names, not many, who made me feel that. Not just because they could win, but because they changed the race before it even started. There are 5 of them I still think about. Some you'll expect, some you probably won't. But every one of them showed me something about this sport that I didn't fully understand until it was too late. Let me start with someone who didn't just run races. He changed what a race felt like. I didn't line up against Usain Bolt. Our careers never crossed that way, but that doesn't mean I didn't study him. When you come from Jamaica, sprinting isn't just a sport. It's a language. And when someone like Bolt comes along, you pay attention. The first time I really watched him closely, not as a fan, but as a runner, I remember thinking something felt off. Not wrong, just different. He didn't carry tension the way most sprinters do. His shoulders stayed loose. His stride longer than anything I'd seen, and yet he wasn't rushing. That's what caught me. Most great sprinters, they fight the race. You can see it in their face, in their arms, in the way they drive forward, like they're trying to take something back from the track. Bolt didn't look like he was fighting anything. He looked like he already owned it. The problem started with his rhythm. Not the start, not even the top speed. It was what happened in between. That transition phase where most runners tighten up just a little, just enough to lose something. He didn't. He stayed relaxed longer than anyone had a right to. And by the time you realized what was happening, it was already gone. I remember watching the 2008 Beijing Olympics final 100 meters, the biggest stage there is. And I was watching like a runner, not a spectator, breaking it down step by step. He got out, not perfectly. Others had better starts. That was expected. But then came that moment, around 60 meters, maybe a touch before everything shifted. Not dramatically, no sudden burst that you could point to, just separation, clean, effortless. Like the race had quietly decided it was over. And then he did something I still think about. He eased up before the line. At the Olympics, that told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't arrogance. People like to call it that. But when you've been on that stage, you understand. You don't let go like that unless you're completely in control. Not just of your body, but of the moment. And that's what made him different. It wasn't just that he was faster. Plenty of men have been fast. It was that he made speed look like it didn't cost him anything. Like he wasn't reaching for it. It was already there. That kind of control, that kind of presence changes how everyone else runs. Even the ones watching from years away. You don't forget races like that. And you don't forget athletes like him. But he wasn't the only one who made me rethink everything I knew about this sport. Now this one is different because with Michael Johnson, it wasn't about how the race looked. It was about how the race was built. I remember the first time I really studied him. Not casually, not like a fan. I mean really watched him the way a runner watches another runner breaking down every step, every movement, every decision. And the first thing that stayed with me wasn't speed. It was controlled. He ran upright, almost too upright. In my era, that would have been corrected immediately. We were taught to lean, to drive, to attack the track like it owed us something. There was always tension in the way we ran, a kind of urgency. Johnson didn't carry that. He looked composed, like he was operating on a different rhythm than everyone else on the track. And that's where the problem began. Because when someone runs with that level of composure, you can't read them the same way. You can't tell when they're pushing. You can't feel when they're about to break. And in a race, that uncertainty costs you. The problem started with his efficiency. Every step had intention. No wasted motion, no extra lift, no unnecessary strain in the shoulders or arms. It wasn't power in the traditional sense. It was something cleaner than that. Precision. Most sprinters, even great ones, leak energy somewhere. A slight tightening in the jaw, a fraction of a second lost in transition. Something small, but enough. He didn't give you that. And when a man doesn't give you anything to take advantage of, you start running his race instead of your own. I remember watching the 1996 Atlanta Olympics 200-meter final. I wasn't just watching the clock. I was watching the structure of the race. The start was solid, not explosive, not overwhelming, but controlled. Then came the curve. That's where races are usually negotiated. You either push too hard and pay for it, or you hold back and lose position. It's a delicate balance, and most runners feel it. Johnson didn't look like he was balancing anything. He entered that bend like he had already solved it. Step by step, he built separation. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just enough, and then a little more. By the halfway point, you could already sense something shifting. Not in the crowd, in the race itself, because the others were still reacting, still adjusting, still trying to figure out where they stood. He already knew. And when he came off the curve, it was over. That's the part people don't always understand. They see the finish, they see the time, they see the gold shoes crossing the line, but the race was gone long before that moment. That's what made him one of the greatest I've ever seen. Not just because he was fast, but because he removed the uncertainty from the race. He didn't leave space for chaos or doubt or error. He replaced all of that with structure. And when you're up against someone who understands a race at that level, you're not just competing against their speed. You're competing against their mind. That kind of greatness doesn't overwhelm you. It slowly takes everything away until there's nothing left to respond with. And once you've seen that kind of control, you start to realize speed alone was never going to be enough. But he wasn't the only one who made greatness feel inevitable. With Carl Lewis, it was something else entirely. I never had to stand in the blocks next to him to understand what he was. Some athletes, you only need to watch once, not for the result, but for the way they carry the moment. And Lewis, he carried it differently. There was no rush in him. That's the first thing that stayed with me. Most athletes, especially on the Olympic stage, you can feel the urgency. It shows in their preparation, in the way they move before the start, in the small details they can't quite hide. Even the greatest feel it. That need to prove something. Lewis didn't look like he needed to prove anything. He walked onto the track like the outcome had already been decided somewhere else long before the race began. Calm, measured, almost distant from the noise around him. And that calm, it spreads. You feel it, even if you're not competing against him. That's aura, and it matters more than people think. Because when someone carries that kind of presence, it changes how everyone else behaves. It pulls you out of your own rhythm, makes you question whether you're doing enough or too much. And that hesitation, even for a second, is everything at that level. The problem with Lewis wasn't one thing. It was the way everything came together at the exact right time. His stride wasn't the longest. His start wasn't always the quickest. But his timing, his sense of when to rise, when to push, when to let the race come to him, that was different. He didn't chase the moment. He waited for it. I remember watching the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics. The scale of it, the expectation, the pressure of performing not just for himself but in front of a home crowd that believed he was already a legend. That kind of pressure breaks most athletes. It didn't touch him. Event after event, he delivered. Not in a frantic way, not like he was reaching for greatness, but like he understood exactly where it would appear and simply met it there. Sprinting, long jump, different disciplines, same control, and that's where it became clear. This wasn't just an athlete winning races. This was someone defining what the Olympics could look like. Because greatness, real greatness, isn't just about dominating one moment. It's about sustaining that level across time, across events, across expectations that most people can't even carry once. Lewis did it again and again. And when you watch someone operate like that, it forces you to reconsider everything you thought you knew about limits, about preparation, about pressure. It's not about how fast you can go. It's about whether you can arrive at the exact right moment and be exactly who you need to be without anything spilling over. That's rare. And that's why he belongs in this conversation. Not just as a champion, but as someone who made the Olympic stage feel like it was built for him. But not all greatness announces itself. Some of it arrives quietly, controlled, almost cold. That's what it felt like with Valerie Borsov. Now this was closer to my time, closer to what I understood. And because of that, it was harder to ignore. We didn't come from the same system. We didn't prepare the same way. But when you line up against someone like that, you realize very quickly none of that matters. What matters is what happens in those first few steps. We weren't friends. In the Olympics, you don't really have time for that. You respect each other from a distance. And sometimes that distance is everything. The first thing you notice about him was how still he could be. Before the start, while everyone else was adjusting, shaking out tension, trying to find rhythm, he stood there, calm, focused, no wasted movement, no sign of doubt. And when the gun went, that stillness turned into something precise. The problem started with his start. Explosive, but clean. Not wild, not desperate, just enough to put you on the back foot immediately. And in a sprint, once you're reacting instead of dictating, you're already losing ground. But it wasn't just the start, it was the discipline. Every phase of his race felt rehearsed, measured, like he had already run it 100 times in his mind before stepping onto the track. No panic, no overcorrection, just execution. I remember watching the 1972 Munich Olympics, the 100 meters, the 200 meters. And what stood out wasn't just the victories, it was how controlled everything looked. No celebration during the race, no reaching for something extra. He didn't need it. He stayed within himself, and that was enough to take everything. That's a different kind of pressure to deal with. Because when someone beats you with raw speed, you can tell yourself a story. You can say they were just faster that day, that maybe next time things change. But when someone beats you with precision, with discipline, with a plan that never breaks, there's nothing to argue with. That's what made him difficult. He didn't overwhelm you. He removed your options. Every mistake you might make, he didn't make it. Every opening you hoped to find wasn't there. And over the course of a race, that builds quietly until you realize you're not catching anything. And by then, it's too late. that kind of greatness doesn't always get remembered the same way. It doesn't have the flash, it doesn't have the spectacle. But if you were there, if you understood what it takes to execute a race at that level, you don't forget it. Because it forces you to confront something uncomfortable, that sometimes perfection isn't loud. Sometimes it just leaves you behind without a word. And even that wasn't the first time I understood what the Olympics could mean beyond the race itself. And then there was someone I never raced, never stood beside, but somehow always felt present. Jesse Owens. I grew up hearing that name long before I understood what it really meant. Back then it was just history, just stories, a man who won races, a man who broke records, the kind of things you hear as a young athlete and file away without thinking too deeply about it. But the older I got, the more I realized it was never just about the races, because Owens wasn't just running against other athletes. He was running against something much bigger. And that changes everything. You have to understand, when we talk about pressure today, we usually mean expectations, media, crowds, the weight of a nation watching you perform. And yes, that's real. I felt that every Olympic athlete has. But what Owens carried was different. It wasn't about winning. It was about what winning meant. I remember studying the 1936 Berlin Olympics years later, watching the footage, reading the accounts, trying to understand what it must have felt like to step onto that track, knowing the world wasn't just watching your time. They were watching what you represented. 4 gold medals. On paper, that tells you everything. But it also tells you nothing, because the real race wasn't just measured in seconds. It was measured in composure, in courage, in the ability to stay focused when everything around you is trying to define you before you even begin. That's a different kind of opponent. You can't see it in the lane next to you. You can't adjust your stride to it. You either carry it or it carries you. And somehow he stayed in control. That's what I keep coming back to. Not just the victories, but the stillness within them. The way he moved through those moments without letting the weight of them break his rhythm, without letting the noise distort what he came there to do. Technically, yes, he was exceptional. His mechanics, his speed, his ability to transition through phases of the race, all of that was ahead of its time. But that's not why he's here. He's here because he proved something that goes beyond technique. That the Olympic stage isn't just about performance. It's about identity, about what you carry with you when you step onto that track, and whether you can hold on to yourself when everything is trying to pull you apart. I never felt that exact moment the way he did, but every time I stepped onto an Olympic track, a small part of that understanding was there, that this isn't just a race. It's something deeper. And once you see it that way, you don't just run for a medal anymore. You run knowing the moment will reveal who you really are. Looking back now, I don't remember the races the way most people do. I don't remember just the finishes, the medals, the times on the clock. What stays with me are the moments before all of that. The silence, the weight of expectation, the feeling that everything you've built is about to be tested in a way you can't control. Every athlete I named showed me something different, not just how to run, but how to carry a moment. Some made it look effortless, some made it feel inevitable, and some forced you to confront the part of yourself you weren't ready to see yet. That's what the Olympics really does. It strips everything away. There's no room for excuses, no space to hide behind reputation or past success, just you and whatever you bring into that moment. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it isn't. But either way, you learn something that stays with you long after the race is over. That greatness was never just about being faster. It was about understanding who you are when everything is on the line. And once you've felt that, once you've stood in that moment, you don't chase medals anymore. You chase that truth.